And as we talk youth unemployment, of course, the SMME space is set to plug the gap and potentially help young people in entering not just the job market, but creating businesses for themselves. And it is said that the African continent has a well of untapped potential in the small and medium enterprises space. Let's speak more on this. We're joined by Mr. John Molanda, Head of Transactional Banking at ABSA CIB. Thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. When we talk about the SMME space on the continent, how would you characterize it?
Thank you so much, Duduzile. Look, the SMME space is really, it is a big space. So firstly, SMMEs constitute around 60 to 70% of all businesses on the continent, also in South Africa. So they're a big contributor to the GDP. We were just talking about unemployment. They employ around 40 to 50% of the workforce. But the SMMEs themselves have a really, I suppose, a disproportionate difficulty in accessing funding. On a global scale, I think there's a study, there's a global study that suggests that rejection rates for SMMEs from a funding perspective stand at around 40% compared to large corporates, which are 17%.
We are talking about a very big space, as you rightfully mentioned. Africa is not a continent. Perhaps I go to West Africa and Ghana, to be specific, where you find people who on the side of the road, they sell anything from brooms to, toilet paper, if you need, to food that you may need, or water, for instance. So that space is very different when you take a look at it, maybe in comparison to South Africa. In terms of it, I guess, just being organized, but it functions on its own and it's well organized on its own. How to tap into that kind of market?
Yeah, and thanks for bringing up. And I think, it's interesting that SMMEs are actually, it's a very organized space, as you say, while, it's characterized as small, but relatively organized. I think, in terms of opportunities, we talk a lot about new entrants into the market that digitize the space of SMEs, which is an important factor in being able to access funding. A lot of the issues that SMEs face stem from the fact that they are largely conducting their business on a cash basis. When you're conducting your business on a cash basis, it kind of makes your ability to produce financial statements or financial data difficult, which then clearly has then an impact on your ability to access funding.
How much of a challenge does this present to yourselves, especially as banks, not just in South Africa, but throughout the continent? I think, please do correct me if I'm wrong, that South Africa has the highest number of banked customers in comparison to the rest of the continent. And then you speak of digitization, the likes of Mukuru that come to mind, the likes of M-Pesa in Kenya that also come to mind, where there's no bank involved.
Yeah. So that's an interesting thing, because as you correctly point out, South Africa has the highest number of banked population. So the dynamics are very different from how you approach this market and the types of partnerships that you get into as a bank. In the rest of the continent that we see, especially in East Africa, and I think even in West Africa, there's a bigger representation from a mobile money perspective, right? So a lot of the partnerships that we would be looking at would be around that particular angle. So it's interesting that we talk about this, because in some ways this whole notion of digitization is already happening, I suppose, in different formats, in different parts of the continent. So, but I think what we need to have is more, I suppose, deliberateness that level, that digitization also enters the SMME space and actually enters how the SMMEs themselves run their businesses.
When you take a look at the past 2 years bleeding on to this year, a lot has happened, right? So you have COVID-19, where a lot of small businesses either thrived or some of them sank. You have the recent floods that we've seen not only in KwaZulu-Natal, but also a number of issues that have set a number of small businesses back. How to protect yourself as a small business from not only acts of nature, things like COVID-19, and situations that are unplanned for?
That's quite an interesting conversation, because what we've seen a lot of, so firstly, I think as a bank, when COVID hit, and I think recently with floods, from a flooding perspective in KwaZulu-Natal, we offered quite a lot of relief to customers. But I think the obvious way in which customers can protect themselves is to actually seek a level of insurance. We now understand, sort of entering this area of, I suppose, what we call climate disasters, and also, COVID has, I suppose, taught us that having a level of insurance is quite important. So that is key. But I also think, sort of going back to making sure that the businesses are running a well-established business. So making sure that initially you are investing in the right sets of technology, and that you're running your business in a way that when you're able to approach a bank, they can see that there's a record of good revenue and a record of delivery.
Thank you very much for availing yourself this afternoon. John Molanda, Head of Transactional Banking at ABSA CIB.